How Guadalcanal's jungles turned Japanese troops from warriors to cowards. Let me yank you right into the muck of September 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The air's so thick with humidity it clings to your skin like wet cloth. Mosquitoes buzz in your ears so loud they drown out the parrots squawking in the trees. And in the underbrush, Private First Class Sato Toshio is curled up, his knees pulled to his chest, his stomach growling so hard it feels like it's chewing on itself. He's been hiding here for 3 days, 3 days since his unit tried to take that American position by the Tenaru River, 3 days since he last had more than a handful of bitter jungle roots to eat. He slips his hand into his uniform pocket, fingers brushing the tiny wooden bird he carved for his sister, Mia. It's rough around the edges, he's no craftsman, but he'd spent 3 nights on the transport ship whittling it, imagining her face when he handed it over. She'll laugh, he'd thought. She'll say I should have carved a rabbit instead, since I always chased them as kids. Now, the wood is slick with his sweat. He presses it to his forehead, and for a second, he almost believes he's home, until a distant machine gun burst snaps him back to reality. You know what Sato was thinking 2 months ago? He was laughing. Literally laughing. Back in Burma, he'd chased British troops through jungles like they were stray dogs, men in starched uniforms, tripping over vines, dropping their rifles to run faster. In Malaya, he'd watched Australian soldiers throw down their weapons at the sight of the rising sun, their hands in the air. His sergeant, Tanaka, not his best friend Tanaka, the other one, the hard-faced one with the scar over his eye, always yelled, "Americans. They're soft. They eat hamburgers, not rice. They sleep in tents with cots. They can't hack jungle war, they'll break at the first Banzai." Sato believed him. Why wouldn't he? The Imperial Army had never lost a major ground fight. He'd seen Chinese villages burn, British forts fall, Dutch soldiers surrender. Courage, samurai spirit, always won. He'd even joked with his best friend, Tanaka, the quiet one, who loved to draw, about what they'd do when they got home, eat Mia's miso soup, visit the old cherry tree by their house, forget about the war. Now, Tanaka's dead. Sato's hand is shaking so bad he can barely hold the wooden bird. He can still hear the American machine guns, those Browning guns, firing so fast they sound like a single, endless roar, like a storm tearing through the jungle. He can still see Tanaka run into the open, his bayonet glinting, yelling, "Banzai!" and drop like a sack of potatoes, his body riddled with holes before he even had time to scream. This isn't the war Sato signed up for. This isn't the weak enemy his leaders talked about. This is something else, something cold, something efficient, something that scares him more than the jungle tigers he'd heard stories about. This is American jungle warfare. And it's about to break the Imperial Japanese Army. Let's back up a second, because to get why Sato and his buddies were so terrified, you gotta understand what they expected. By 1942, the Japanese army thought it was unbeatable. They'd steamrolled China in 1937, taken Singapore from the British in 1941, a fortress everyone said was impregnable, and chased the Dutch out of Indonesia in weeks. Their whole strategy was built on one idea, spirit over steel. They moved light, no heavy gear, no tents, just rifles, grenades, and a small pouch of rice. They marched for days without sleep, snuck around enemy flanks in the dark, and charged fast, yelling, "Banzai," to break the other side's will. Their officers told them, a soldier with courage can defeat 10 men with guns. The Emperor is with us, we cannot lose. Sato bought into that. He'd heard the stories, of soldiers who'd held off entire platoons with just a bayonet, of men who'd died smiling because they'd served the Emperor. He wanted to be that soldier. He wanted to go home with a story to tell, not just a wooden bird. Then came Guadalcanal. Tiny island, 90 miles long, mostly thick jungle and stinking swamps. The Japanese wanted to build an airfield there, they called it Henderson Field, so they could bomb American ships in the South Pacific. But on August 7, 1942, 11,000 U.S. Marines landed and grabbed the airfield before the Japanese even finished pouring concrete. Tokyo lost its mind. "Take it back," they ordered. They sent elite units, guys who'd fought in China, veterans of the Burma jungle, with one order: crush the Americans. Show them what samurai spirit looks like. Sato was in that first wave. He boarded a transport ship in Rabaul, his rifle polished till it shined, his uniform pressed so sharp it could cut. The sergeants gave speeches on the deck, their voices loud over the ocean wind: "You will be home by Christmas. The Americans will run when they see you charge. They do not have the stomach for this fight." Sato stood next to Tanaka, who was sketching the ocean in a small notebook. "Think we'll really be home by Christmas?" Tanaka asked, his pencil moving fast. Sato nodded. "Of course. These Americans are soft. We'll be eating miso soup before you know it." Tanaka smiled. "Good. I'm tired of rice." Sato didn't know then that Tanaka would never taste miso soup again. He didn't know that by Christmas, he'd be hiding in the jungle, wondering if he'd ever see home again. The first time Sato saw an American, he thought it was a trick. It was August 21, 1942, the Battle of the Tenaru River. His unit, 800 men, had snuck across the river at midnight, wading through waist-deep water, their rifles held over their heads. The plan was simple: wait till dawn, yell "Banzai," run as fast as they could, and overwhelm the Marines before they even woke up. Sato was in the front row. His hands were sweaty on his rifle, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. The sky was starting to turn pink when the sergeant yelled "Charge!" And they were off, screaming at the top of their lungs, bayonets pointed forward. Then the world exploded. First, the machine guns. They came out of nowhere, 2, 3, maybe 4 of them, firing so fast Sato could barely tell the shots apart. It sounded like 1,000 bees, all angry, all swarming at once. He saw a guy to his left drop mid-step, his chest torn open, blood soaking his uniform. Another guy in front of him tripped over a root, and before he could get up, bullets turned his back into a sieve. Tanaka was right next to him. "Come on, Sato," he yelled, his voice tight with excitement. Then he took a bullet to the throat. He gurgled, his hands flying to his neck, blood pouring between his fingers. He fell to his knees, looked at Sato, and then collapsed. Sato froze. For a second, he forgot to run. He forgot to yell. He just stared at Tanaka's body, at the blood pooling in the mud. Then a bullet zipped past his ear, so close he could feel the heat, and he dove into the muck, his face hitting the wet dirt. His ears were ringing so bad he couldn't hear anything. He peeked up through the grass, and that's when the fear hit him, cold and sharp, like a knife to the chest. The Americans weren't standing. They weren't charging. They were behind logs, behind holes they'd dug in the ground, their heads down, firing slow and steady. No yelling, no bravado, just shots. One after another. Like they were hunting deer, not men. "What the hell is this?" Sato yelled to the guy next to him, a kid from Osaka, maybe 18. But before he got an answer, a bullet hit the kid in the head. His eyes went wide, and he fell forward, his face landing in the mud. By sunrise, it was over. 800 Japanese soldiers went into that attack. 777 died. Only 23 made it back. Sato was one of them, but he'd been shot in the leg, a small wound, but it burned like fire, and his rifle was gone, lost in the chaos. He crawled through the bush for hours, his hands and knees getting cut up by thorns, listening to his own heartbeat, scared to breathe too loud. That's when the fear started. Not the "I might die" fear, every soldier fears that. This was the "I don't understand" fear. These Americans didn't fight like any enemy he'd ever seen. They didn't care about honor or courage. They didn't charge. They didn't yell. They just won. With bullets. With cover. With whatever it took. Sato stopped thinking about the emperor. He stopped thinking about samurai spirit. He started thinking about Mie's wooden bird, and how he might never get to give it to her. He started thinking about how to stay alive. You want to know what's worse than machine guns? The waiting. And the hunger. The Japanese army thought they could supply Guadalcanal with Tokyo Express runs, fast destroyers that dropped off food and ammo at night, then booked it before American planes found M. But the Americans had the Cactus Air Force, planes based right on Henderson Field, painted with big white stars. Those pilots loved hunting Tokyo Express ships. They'd bomb M, strafe M, sink M before they even got close to shore. So Sato's unit starved. At first, it was a cup of rice a day, small, but enough to keep going. Then half a cup. Then nothing. The supply officers would shake their heads and say, "More is coming soon," but it never was. They ate leaves, bitter, slimy things that made their stomachs ache. They ate roots, tough, like wood, but they chewed M anyway. They even chased rats through the jungle. Most of the time, the rats got away, but once, a guy caught one, cooked it over a tiny fire, and shared it with 3 of them. It tasted like dirt, but Sato ate every bite. One day, Sato found an empty can of American food in an abandoned marine foxhole. It said, "Spam," on the label. He didn't know what it was, but he shook it, nothing inside. He smelled it anyway, hoping for a whiff of something other than jungle rot. It smelled like salt. He tucked it in his pocket, next to the wooden bird. A souvenir, he thought. A reminder that the Americans had something he didn't, enough. Meanwhile, the Americans. They ate like kings. Sato saw them once, through the trees, sitting on cots, eating out of cans, laughing. One guy threw a chocolate bar wrapper on the ground. Sato snuck over later, picked it up, and smelled it. It smelled like sweet, rich candy, something he hadn't had since he was a kid. He folded it up and put it in his pocket, next to the Spam can. They had clean water, too. They built wells, or boiled water with little white tablets. The Japanese drank from rivers, dirty, brown water, and soon half the unit had diarrhea or malaria. Sato's friend Watanabe got malaria. He was a big guy, from Hokkaido, who'd once lifted a crate of ammo by himself. Now, he shook so hard he couldn't hold his rifle. His skin was yellow, his lips cracked. One night, he whispered to Sato, his voice so weak it was almost a breath, "I don't care about the emperor. I don't care about the war. I just want to eat rice again. I want to see my mom. Tell her I'm sorry I left." Sato nodded. He didn't know what else to do. He held Watanabe's hand till he fell asleep. 3 days later, Watanabe died. Sato buried him in a shallow hole, using his hands to dig the dirt. He didn't have a shovel. He didn't have a marker. He just said a quick prayer, "Rest easy, friend," and walked away. He didn't have the strength to cry. He was too busy worrying about who'd be next. Then came Bloody Ridge. You've probably heard of it. It's where the Japanese learned that courage doesn't mean squat against bullets. The high command had gone crazy. They'd lost so many men, so much supplies, but they couldn't admit defeat. So they said, one big attack. Wave after wave. The Americans will run out of ammo. They'll get tired. They'll break. They sent 3,000 men, Sato's unit included, up a ridge overlooking Henderson Field. The plan was simple: charge at night, take the ridge before dawn. Sato was scared. His legs still hurt. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He'd seen what American machine guns could do at Tenaru. But the sergeant, new one, since the old one died at Tenaru, had a samurai sword, and he yelled, his voice loud and angry, "Die for the emperor. Death is an honor. Those who retreat are cowards." Sato looked around. The other guys were scared too, he could see it in their eyes. But no one said anything. They'd been told their whole lives that cowardice was worse than death. So they lined up. They fixed their bayonets. They waited for the order. Charge! They ran. Into the dark. Into the bullets. The machine gun started again, Browning M1917s, 600 rounds a minute. The Americans threw grenades that exploded in the air, pineapples, they called them, and dropped mortar rounds right into the middle of the Japanese lines. Sato felt the ground shake under his feet. He saw men fly through the air, their bodies broken. He ran as fast as he could, but it was useless. A guy in front of him got hit in the stomach, he fell, screaming, holding his guts in his hands. Sato had to jump over him. He saw a group of 20 Japanese soldiers charge a single American foxhole. The Marine didn't even stand up, he just held down the trigger on his Browning, and all 20 fell. One after another. Like dominoes. Sato saw the new sergeant, the one with the sword, try to cut barbed wire with his blade. A bullet hit him in the chest. He dropped the sword, stared down at his bloodied uniform, and fell. By morning, 2,200 Japanese were dead. The Americans lost 80. Sato survived by hiding under a pile of bodies. He crawled under them, his face pressed against a dead guy's back, and lay still. The bodies were warm at first, then cold. The smell of blood was so strong he wanted to throw up, but he didn't. He held his breath. He listened. He could hear the Americans talking, tired, bored, like they'd just mowed the lawn. "Man, I'm ready for a beer," one said. "This jungle sucks," another replied. "Let's get this cleaned up so we can eat." That's when it clicked. The Americans weren't supermen. They were just guys with enough bullets, enough food, and enough sense to not charge into machine guns. They didn't care about honor. They cared about going home. And the Japanese? They had courage. They had samurai spirit. But that didn't stop bullets. That didn't fill empty stomachs. That didn't cure malaria. Sato thought about Watanabe. About Tanaka. About the kid from Osaka. What had their courage gotten them? A shallow grave in the jungle. He closed his eyes. He wanted to go home. The final straw came in November. The Japanese Navy tried to send a big convoy, 11 ships, 13,000 soldiers, tons of supplies, to save Guadalcanal. Sato and the other guys watched from the shore, their hearts hopeful. Finally, Sato thought. Food. Ammo. We can fight back. We can go home. But then the American planes came. And the American ships. Sato could hear the battle out at sea, cannons booming, planes crashing, explosions lighting up the night sky. He stood there, watching, praying. By morning, the sea was quiet. The smoke was thick, like fog. Sato could see the wreckage, pieces of ships floating in the water, bodies bobbing like dolls. The Americans had sunk 7 of the 11 ships. Most of the supplies went to the bottom of the ocean. The few soldiers who made it to shore had nothing, no guns, no food, just rags. That's when Sato knew. They'd lost. Not just the battle. The war. Tokyo gave up. On December 12, 1942, they ordered a retreat, Operation Coup, they called it. They snuck the last soldiers off the island at night, in small boats, so the Americans wouldn't notice. Sato was on one of those boats. It was January 1943. His legs still hurt. He weighed 90 pounds. His uniform was ragged, his hair long and dirty. As the boat pulled away from Guadalcanal, he looked back at the jungle, green, dark, endless. He thought about Watanabe's shallow grave. About Tanaka's body, left to rot by the Tenaru River. About all the guys who didn't make it. He pulled the wooden bird out of his pocket. It was still there, still rough around the edges. He held it tight. He never wanted to see that jungle again. When Sato got back to Japan, he didn't talk about the war. His family asked, "Did you win? Did you fight bravely?" He just shook his head. He couldn't tell them about the machine guns. He couldn't tell them about eating rats. He couldn't tell them about the fear, the kind of fear that makes you forget about honor, forget about the emperor, forget about everything except staying alive. He gave Mia the wooden bird. She cried. She didn't ask why he was so thin, why he walked with a limp, why he woke up screaming at night. She just hugged him. Years later, after the war, Sato wrote a memoir. He didn't talk about glory. He didn't talk about samurai spirit. He talked about the mud. The hunger. The sound of Browning machine guns in the night. One line stuck out, "We thought we were warriors. But in the jungles of Guadalcanal, we were just targets. The Americans didn't fight like we did. They fought to win, and that's the scariest thing of all." Here's the thing about Guadalcanal, it wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point. Before Guadalcanal, the Japanese army had never lost a major ground campaign. After Guadalcanal, they never won another one. Why? Because Guadalcanal proved something the Japanese high command didn't want to believe: this wasn't a war about courage. It was a war about industrial power. The Americans could build more planes, more ships, more guns than Japan ever could. They could feed their soldiers, treat their wounds, and keep sending more men to fight. The Japanese? They couldn't. The numbers tell the story. During the Guadalcanal campaign, the Japanese lost 24,000 men, 75% of them to starvation or disease, not combat. The Americans lost 1,600 men to combat, and 4,200 to disease, but they had enough replacements to keep fighting. The Americans built 10,000 planes in 1942. Japan built 4,000. The Americans sent 60,000 troops to Guadalcanal. Japan sent 36,000, and couldn't supply half of them. For guys like Sato, Guadalcanal wasn't just a defeat. It was a wake-up call. They realized their leaders had lied to them. The emperor wasn't going to lead them to victory. Samurai spirit wasn't going to stop bullets. This was a war they couldn't win, not because they weren't brave, but because the other side had more of everything that mattered. Today, Guadalcanal is quiet. The jungle has grown over the foxholes, the bullet holes, the shallow graves. The mosquitoes still buzz. The humidity still clings. But if you listen closely, if you stand in the mud, and smell the rot, and hear the wind rustle the leaves, you can still hear it. The echoes of Banzai, cut short by machine guns. The quiet whimpers of soldiers who knew they were done. The sound of a wooden bird, hidden in a pocket, a reminder of home. And that's the lesson of Guadalcanal: courage is important. Honor is important. But in the end, wars are won by the side that can outbuild, outsupply, and outlast the other. The Japanese had courage. The Americans had everything else. For Sato Toshio, that was the scariest truth of all. Years later, when Mia's son, his nephew, asked about the wooden bird, Sato just said, "It's from a place I hope you never have to see." He never told him the rest. Some stories are too heavy to share.